Good morning, class. We are making empanadas today. That's what the single one looks like. According to Mr. Deaton, empanadas are usually fried, and they usually have meat or cheese filling in them. But we're making our pumpkin empanadas today. Here's a little presentation, a little pinwheel with empanadas. So we're doing a pumpkin variety because it's fall, and that would be a great thing to do in the fall. They're nice and warm. They're best eaten when they're warm. All right, I have all my supplies out, everything ready to go. The first thing I'm gonna do is make my pumpkin mixture. Now my pumpkin mixture is just a half a cup of pumpkin. And this in this cup is a half a cup. So you can just use the whole cup of pumpkin. Now we saw in the video this week that pumpkin is very easy to make. You just take a small pumpkin and you cut it in half and put it into the oven for about an hour, and that's what you would get, okay? The next thing is the cinnamon, or the allspice. The allspice is cloves and cinnamon, and I already have it in here with my 3 tablespoons. So those 2 containers, we're going to use the entire container. Okay, the rest of the containers, not so. But for our filling, I measured it exactly for you this time. So we're going to mix that up. Oh, you can smell that allspice. You can smell the nutmeg in there. The pumpkin, and this becomes our filling for our empanadas. Now, if you don't like pumpkin filling, next time you make them, you could put apple pie filling in there, you could put cherry pie filling in, something that's already made. You can take apples and put apple and cinnamon and just put 1 or 2 cut up into small pieces. And I'm gonna set this aside. So that's just my sugar, my allspice, and my pumpkin. Now I'm gonna make my dough. So this you're gonna have to measure out because you're gonna need some of that flour to put onto your board when you roll out. So make sure you're measuring this exactly so that you have some extra for your countertop. So I'm gonna roll that out and I'm gonna level that off. 1 cup of flour. Now this is regular all-purpose flour. We're not using high gluten for any kind of pastry because that high gluten is for yeast breads. 2 tablespoons of sugar, so you have another little container. Measure this out because we're gonna need some sugar for our topping also. So you're gonna measure it out and level it off. 1, 2, and the remainder of that is going to go with your cinnamon for your topping. So put that to the side with your cinnamon and your egg. And then we're going to use baking powder. Now baking powder is not typical when you're making pastry, but every once in a while your recipe will call for some baking powder, and this is our leavening agent. So make sure we're overfilling and then leveling off. You don't want to dump that because that's about another ½ teaspoon, and that would be way too much baking powder. Okay, then we have 1/4 teaspoon of salt. Salt, remember, enhances the flavor, so that's why we're using salt. And then we're going to use our shortening, but I'm going to mix this first because I want my salt and my baking powder to be thoroughly mixed into my flour. Otherwise, I'm going to have lumpy, bumpy empanadas on one hand and then flat ones on the other hand. Okay, going to take my 1/3 cup of shortening. Again, we are measuring this out into our 1/3 measuring cup, and I'm going to pack that in, and then I'm going to level that off. Okay, so I have more left in my container. I don't want to add too much of that because then my dough would be very greasy and the consistency would be totally wrong. So you can save that for some other time. All right, I'm going to take my pastry blender. If you don't have that, you can use your 2 knives. Pastry blenders are nice to have. And I'm going to coat that shortening with my flour. This time I'm going to use milk. In our typical pastry, it's just water, salt, flour, and some kind of fat. But this is a little bit different. This consistency at the end is a little bit different, but it's still considered a pastry. All right, I want it to be crummy. I don't want to get to the stage where it's a paste. I'm just coating that fat with some flour, and then I'm going to switch to my fork. So it's nice and crummy. Like we saw in the video, you could do it in a food processor if you wanted. You're going to pulse that. And then we're going to add our milk, but we're not going to add all of our milk. We're just going to add a little bit of milk. This is the 4th cup. Now you have a container of milk. You're going to need some of that for the end. So we're not going to use all of that milk. Okay, it's good, but it needs a little bit more. This is ice cold milk, just out of the refrigerator, because I don't want that shortening to dissolve until I get it into the oven. Just our typical pastry techniques. All right, I think that's good. I've got my milk left over, and I'm going to put that over with my ingredients to do my topping. Put my dishes in the dishwasher, which is me. Okay. I'm going to dump this out on the counter. I think that's the easiest way to do it. And I'm going to gather this up. Okay, this is a little bit moist, more moist than our pie crust.